And we are good to go. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Skype a Scientist Live. My name is Sarah McAnulty. I run Skype a Scientist, and I will be your question moderator for the day. And we are super excited to have Liz Kozik. Welcome. I met Liz back in 2018 or 19. Who's to say? Sometime around then, out at Purdue, I think. And yeah, and got to see all of her cool artwork and all the cool stuff she does. I have, Liz, I have one of your prints of bees on my fridge.
Nice.
So it's beautiful and I love it. So hello, everyone. We're going to be talking about how you can bring science and art together, specifically as it comes to comics. So with that, I'm going to hand the stage over to Liz. If you have any questions at home, please submit them. You can put them in the Q&A function at the bottom. And if it's a question that is about Skype a Scientist that I can answer, I'll type your response back. If it's about something that is relevant to the session, I'll ask it to Liz out loud. Take it away.
All righty. Just making sure I'm sharing screen. The Zoom life is so much fun. There we go. Hello, everyone. My name is Liz Anna Kozik, and I am currently a PhD student at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. And for the most part, I'm a weird in between an artist and a scientist. And come on, you can behave. There we go. Deeply relevant to my work is the fact that I live on, sorry about this. My computer is mad at me. I live on Ho-Chunk and Potawatomi land, and they are the original stewards of the prairie, and the prairie exists because of them. And so we'll get into why this is directly relevant to my research. There you go. So this is what my work kind of looks like. I draw a lot of science communication and history on prairie restoration, and all the people who have lived and worked in these spaces. A lot of my work happens through social media. It's a space, coming up as an internet kid who drew digital art. Like I was on DeviantArt as a kid, and it's always made sense for me. But also what's really wonderful, especially about Twitter, is it is the space where a lot of scientists meet and interact and share their stories, and amazing people like Sarah and her project all happen in these spaces. So that's where you'll find me doing and sharing most of my research. So when I grew up, prairie was just like a thing that was there. I live in Illinois, and this particular temperate grassland was, oh, of course, that's what we have always kind of been. And it never meant anything to me or was like a particular central focus until I moved away. And so when I was living in Rhode Island as an undergraduate, I, had all these romantic ideas of what the prairie was and all the grassland and all these plants and fire. And turns out, once I moved back to the Midwest, all of those prairies I knew were restorations. They were either old farmland, or I used to bike as a kid, was forced to by my parents, hated it, to bike along old railways that still had some prairie. So it kind of freaked me out, right? It's like, does this mean that there's no real nature? Like, this is what prairie restorations often look like. And so I had this internal crisis of being like, oh my God, I really am just from the suburbs. There's nothing there besides lawn. But the more time I spent working with scientists and in these restoration spaces where people work really, really hard for years and years and years to recreate these prairies, the more I completely fell in love with it, got excited about it. And that's a lot of what I do now. And so all these drawings you're seeing, they're mine. This is one of my favorite prairie restorations. This is at Medewin National Tallgrass Prairie in Joliet, Illinois. It's just sort of like southwest of Chicago. And this is a lot of what prairie looks like. it involves a lot of volunteer labor, people who have day jobs and do other things. And just for the love of their local landscape, they help, like these people in the top picture, they're collecting seeds for replanting. In the middle picture is the classic prairie burn, which we'll get more into. And at the bottom is just a nice exploration. I think they're actually out weed picking, which is a lot of what restoration is. So the more and more I dug into prairie restoration, studying it as like my own thing, you know, I was trained as an artist, and I just happened to read history and science on the side. And the more and more I dug into it, the more and more like enticing and juicy all these different stories of different people. And this is one of my favorite images to use because it's such a tight little story. We see this native man who is starting this fire, and the heroic settler is aghast. His horses are rearing, the baby is crying, mom is trying to comfort the kid. And so we can see here in the initial settlement of the tallgrass prairie, fire was a menace, it was violence, it was horror, and it was proof of the savagery, gross word, of the native people of the tallgrass prairie. And so we have this basic little story of this initial horror and hatred and danger, which slowly turns into, too bad the natives all died. They didn't. When we kicked them out for some reason, like within 30 years, people notice, and they have documents in like the 1850s of people's journals being like, there used to be a prairie there, but in like less than 15 years, suddenly there's just a woodland. And so by the time we get to the 1930s, people are like, oh my God, the prairie's all gone. We need to bring it back. How the heck do we do that? And by the 1950s, they're like, there was a reason they were lighting it on fire, because prairie tallgrass especially has a habit of getting encroached by trees and shrubs. And the more trees and shrubs creep in, the less the grass can succeed. And so, you know, yearly to every 3 to 5 years, having a fire pushes those trees back and maintains prairie, to the point where there are studies done where you'll find deep in woodlands, like there's one place in Green Bay, Wisconsin, where in the middle of these woods, there's suddenly prairie species. Like there's tallgrass prairies, fancy grasses, all the different flowers that are usually found on the prairie. And they're like, oh my God, the reason this little isolated chunk exists is because it used to be part of the larger prairie. And so now this is what prairie science looks like. There's an entire subfield of people who study and practice burning prairie. This is from a friend of mine who just did a burn. I think this is the South Calumet prairie restoration, which is just like straight south of Chicago. There's a big sort of former dock area that they're working on. And so we have these wonderful moments where we start with the horror of fire to this is what science is. This is what science looks like. And so when I act as a science communicator, these are the stories I'm very much interested in keeping in mind. It's not as simple as just being like, a scientist did the study and it was cool. It's like, okay, let's talk about how we got to that point. Where did that science come from? What is the history of the space in which that science happened? Because although it seems sometimes like it's out of time, science is very much a part of and in response to our history. And the more we understand, especially in prairie and other North American landscapes, the better we understand how Native people helped establish these landscapes, the better we can work now to restore and maintain them and maintain our biodiversity. Let's see. So this is me. And now I want to swing down. Hang on. I wish I had a smooth transition here. So we change from video to OBS virtual. Come on. Do this. Da-da-da. Welcome to my drawing desk.
Are all of those like pigments or paints or inks
Yes.
or?
So these are all of my inks and my
Cool.
cat. He's helping. He's sound asleep, thank God. He likes to be in my arms when I'm doing Zoom interviews and such. But so let's see. Here's January 2021. So we have like all sorts of, come on, focus. So these are works that I've done over the past couple months. And I have tons of books I could flip through, but at this point, I would love to open up to conversations. And then maybe I can draw some pictures for you if we want to talk about that. If you have questions about my process.
That's amazing. We have a lot of questions already. We have over 200 people here, which is pretty
God.
Awesome. Okay. So first of all, shout out to Mrs. Spector, Mrs. Derrick, and Miss Goldman's class out in Rhode Island. They were here last week, and apparently this is all they can talk about all week. So hooray for science.
Yay!
Thank you for being here again.
I went to the Rhode Island School of Design. So I did spend 4 years in Providence. It doesn't fully count as a Rhode Islander, but like I appreciate it.
Half credit for sure. Awesome. Okay, so our first question is from Sabrina. Do you have any inspiration for someone wanting to pursue environmental science in college?
Inspiration.
Honestly, I think this whole, like everything you've just shown me is pretty inspirational. But yeah, that was the question.
Well, I genuinely, if you are interested in the environment, I invite you to figure out what about it really speaks to you. Like when you come, especially as an undergrad, no one's gonna like make you be like, you have to do prairie restoration in this particular region of the Prairie Peninsula. No one's gonna make you do that. But it helps to sort of find your landscape that speaks to you and what plants or animals or, you know, whoever. And it doesn't have to be where you grew up. Like that just happens to be how I got fixated. But there's something that will make your heart sing when you just like go for a hike in it. Like think about that, find that and use that as your starting point.
Awesome. Yeah, squids is what made my heart sing. Prairies is what made your heart sing. It's different for everybody. And that's wonderful. That's why we need so many different people in science, because like what is exciting is different for everybody. So you got to just find what makes you happy. Our next question is from Mia. What made you want to be an artist and scientist at the same time?
So I was just drawing these things and having fun on my own. And then when I wanted to learn more, I started asking people. And the more I started asking people, the more I picked up on the side, and I just sort of grew and grew and grew. And in part, it was the people who understood what I was trying to do with my art ended up being scientists who were like, oh my God, this is so cool. No one does this work. What if you did X, Y, Z? And if environmental communication with art is something you're interested in, good news, there's more jobs than we can do. There is no shortage of need for this type of work. So please come join me. Come take off some of the load.
Yeah. So Skype a Scientist will often like try to hire science artists for various projects. And a lot of the time people are like, we can't, we're too booked. So yeah, it's definitely a place where we need more people doing the work. So that's great. All right, the next question is from Maria. What are some of the elements of prairie restoration?
Some of the
elements. Fire.
So fire is a big one. It's what we like to call the charismatic one, because it's like really attractive and you see, oh, something's on fire. I want to go check that out. Yeah. But a lot of the practicals of prairie restoration is weed management. Prairies, they are susceptible both to native and non-native invasive species, which it's a slippery word. What I like to say is that there are certain plants that make bad neighbors. And what they do is they crowd out other plants. They take all their sunlight, or they absorb all the nutrients from the soil, or there's some species that actually will put out plant poison for other plants. So they get pushed away. They're pretty cool. They're allelopathic plants.
Cool.
So it's a lot of that. And a lot of the problems, one of the central things with restoration is that the bigger a space, the better it will do. And unfortunately, a lot of restorations are in very small sections of land. And so what that does is basically create more opportunities for tons of weeds. And then if they're not carefully tended to, and so that's like the last tenet is like labor. You need people there. People were there, 300 years ago when it was the Potawatomi managing the space, and people are needed now with, volunteer restorationists.
Very cool. Very cool. The next question is from Madison. How did you figure out your art style? And you have like such a, like, if I see something that's yours, I don't need to see, like, I know it's yours right away because of the way your stuff just looks. So how do you like find that?
So colors are my easy one. I point to a picture of the prairie in fall and be like, that's it. Mm-hmm. And so even my tattoos, match those colors. Uh-huh. But in part, I looked to, when I was in art school, I was initially attracted to floral patterning and studying the history of floral patterning. And then I became more interested in what florals were in those patterns and what are the history of those plants and where do they come from? And so it all sort of spiraled out of control. But that initial moment of looking at like 1860s European florals sort of was the point at which I jumped off. And yeah.
Cool. All right, so we've got a question from 6HB in Alberta, Canada. What is your degree in that allowed you to do what you're doing right now? Or is like your degree only part of what makes you you?
So it's tricky. Half of this work is actually just showing up and talking to the right people. So my undergraduate degree is in printmaking, which is a fine art process and a little niche. My second degree is a master's of fine art in fibers, which again is sort of like, oh, okay. Yeah. But through all of these, I've been working in prairie ornamentation since 2009 as an undergrad. So that I just kept following that thread to the point where for my PhD program, I was like, hey, here's my master's thesis. It's a history of the first prairie restoration. Do you want me to come do this for my PhD? And they were like, yes, please. So there's an urge to want to find something that's already built to help you do this kind of work. But the reality is, if you follow this type of path, you are doing such a thing that is both wanted and different that people will say yes if you ask. And if they say no, they're not the people you want to work with anyway. Because those people exist too. There are people at my own institution who think I'm a waste of time and, I have no scientific rigor and my work is useless and distracting. And that's okay. They're wrong.
Yeah. Every unique person that's doing something that isn't like right on like the next step in a well-trod path is going to have people who think that they're not doing the right thing. But in my opinion, carving your own path is really valuable and important and rewarding. So I'm with you there. The next question is, okay. So you mentioned like size in prairies and you needing like a certain amount of size to be healthier, basically. Like how big are we talking here? Like a football field would be too small, presumably, but like what's too small and what's big enough?
So there's not a straightforward answer to that. So there's a lot of effort of certain groups to get people to convert their like lawns and front yards into prairies. Oh, okay. And at that small a scale, you can bring pollinators and you can maintain, it actually helps a lot with flooding and helping your watershed manage water processing and stuff like that. But it doesn't quite support the same diversity of life that a connected prairie is. But then if you talk about, hey, we could convert an entire neighborhood into having prairie gardens out front. So there's a whole pathway. That's actually been proven to be a useful path forward and a way to sustain diversity. And so a lot of prairie conservation sort of deals with this issue of tiny patches. Mm-hmm. So what we call remnant prairies, which are prairies that were never plowed, that still sort of like maintain some of their original diversity, tracing back, 200 years. They exist because they were weird, out of the way places, like hills, graveyards, railways. Those are the three reliable places to find prairie. And so they're these tiny little patches, but a lot of the work being done is trying to connect those patches so species can move across them and maintain diversity and not get all inbred and weird. So, but I mean, it'd be nice if we could have giant prairies. You have to come up with the money to buy that land.
Yeah, for sure. Cool. All right. So Z has a question. Do you have any advice for an aspiring science communicator and how to incorporate art into that work? And just like a side note, Z is listening at 1 a.m. in Singapore. So thank you for joining so late.
Thank you for joining. That's so early or late, I'll say. Yeah. So incorporating art, scientists don't like, or there are a lot of scientists who do art, but there are a lot of scientists who say, I don't know anything about drawing. I can't do anything. And then you ask them to draw a diagram and they're amazing and incredibly talented. So I invite you, for your starting point, draw your diagrams and spend a little more time on them and see what happens. So a lot of the work I've done is actually consulting with scientists to help them learn to draw their own research. And Sarah, were you at that workshop that we did?
Yeah, for sure. I have a bunch of squid all doodled, for sure.
So as long as you can put a pen to paper, or digitally speaking, everyone's got tablets, which are great for that. Don't be afraid to make a mark. I will always consult Linda Barry. She just released a book on making comics. She is the person who taught me to coming back into comics for the first time since I was like a little kid. And
that's great.
Yeah.
Awesome. Next question is from Dexter and Milo. Dexter's 9 and Milo is 10. We love science and art too. We've been learning to make our own comics, and we would love your advice on how to make fun/interesting stories out of science facts.
I have a comic for you, as a matter of fact. So one of these NSF grants I worked with for science communication. Sorry, I'm trying to pull it up. We actually came up with a recipe for a starting point for science comics. And I will share a link in the chat. I think will be the easiest way to do that. But yeah, something that's fun to do is to think about your story and who's the main character of your story. Is the main character your scientist? Is the main character your proton or amoeba or hawk or the clouds? And how does your story change if you change who that main character is? I will drop this link.
There's no chat, but
there's no chat.
There's no chat because we try to keep it real safe. But we can, if somebody asks like, what's the link? I'll reply and then you'll all be able to see it. Great. Let's see. So is there anywhere that people can buy your work?
Oh, yes, thank you. I just released my first book, which is kind of crazy. Your local bookshop, if you are in the Americas, should have it. This is Growing Food. So this was co-written Joseph Takunovich. He is I would call it a science communicator. He doesn't, feel shy about that, but he's an expert in gardening education. And so he wanted to do an introductory book to your first vegetable garden. And so that is what this is.
Amazing.
It is a comic book of doing your first garden, picking your plants, learning about weather. Yeah, lead. This is an important page for me. Gotta be safe around lead.
Oh yeah, no kidding.
But yeah, so that is a place where you can buy that. Your local bookstore, Amazon, Penguin Random House, but definitely prefer your local indie bookstore.
Yeah.
And if you go to liz.kozik.net, you can see all of my other work, and I sell prints.
Cool. I'm always my godson. I'm trying to like infiltrate as much science into his brain as humanly possible. So I'll probably get that for him. All right. Our next question is from Jessica. Can you talk more about the difference between scientific illustration and your comic work?
It's a slippery slope, right? So I can speak in terms of my area of expertise, which is plants. So there are people who are trained to do studies of exact plant structures so that they go in books so people know this is how you identify this plant, because the underside has fuzzy leaves and they're gray as opposed to fuzzy leaves and they're white. And so there are people who get into that sort of level of granularity. And I know some people who do like actual anatomical illustration for medical work. And so they're like literally touching dead bodies and working with muscles and organs and stuff. It's not my thing. So there are very formal programs out there that will teach you how to do that particular kind of academic illustration. And I would not call myself that sort of very, very formal, precise, photorealistic, and it's not even that it's photorealistic, it's that it's communicating what a person needs to know if they're studying that subject. And I think I'm more on the storytelling side and more on the sort of public engagement, like, "Ooh, isn't this cool?" type thing than super high academic illustration.
Yeah, it's really more about like partially like who's the audience in a sense, like because scientific illustration, it's like we're using it to do science or like to learn so that we can do more science, and like comics is like it could be for everybody, it could be for different people, it could be for scientists too. It's just it kind of depends on like the audience and the venue kind of. Okay, cool. So sorry, what was the link again? So because a lot of people have now asked for the link, so I can include that.
So if you do
the like how to comic thing.
Yes. Yeah, so if you go to liz.kozik.net and you go to scholarship, sorry, it's like a string of numbers, so I'm not going to send you a string of
cool,
yes.
Okay.
Yes.
You can now find that in the answers. And everybody else who asked the question, I'm going to delete your question just so that we could keep things clean and easy to read. Okay, cool. So let me ask the next question. Are there herds on prairies, and like how do animals and plants interact on a prairie?
So you've hit on a cool hot button topic. Bison are a part of prairie restoration. And then you get into the conversation of what do bison do when they show up on a prairie, especially what do bison do when they're on a prairie that's too small for them. So there's an actually famous case of bringing bison onto a prairie restoration and the bison wreck shop. Like a lot of sensitive plants were just totally wrecked. And so there's this whole discussion within the field being like, oh, bison are bad, or, bison are good. But there are other prairie restorations that are larger or have different, they're longer lasting or infinite variables where bison do great and they help the prairie. And so there's a site in Kansas where there's pretty much been uninterrupted studying prairie and bison for 40 plus years. And so that's a lot of where we get our studying the bison, and where it's really cool. It's a huge prairie. It's one of the biggest prairies. And cool. Check out the Kanza.
Awesome. The next question is from Amanda Marquis. Liz, how do you identify stories that you want to tell? Do the stories find you, or do you hunt them down? It's a good question.
It is a good question. A lot of it is what interests me, but then also it's what do scientists that I'm interested in the questions they're asking, what are they working on? Because usually they'll be like, oh, I have this paper coming out. I'm not supposed to tell anyone about it, but can you look at it? Would you consider drawing a picture? And so I actually get a lot of really cool work through that path. And I'm excited about the projects I'm working on right now.
Awesome. The next question is from Tessa. What has been a challenge in environmental communications that you've learned to navigate? That's a hard question, but a good one.
There are options I could share. A challenge. So, and this might be more about being a communicator in general. Mm-hmm. If people aren't convinced you know what you're talking about, they won't talk to you. If people don't trust your motives or the way you look or your politics, they won't talk to you. And so a lot of just in general science communicators find that they have to learn everything about everything in order to be taken seriously. And so that has been a very hard thing to do. I've learned as much as I can, but I also have to find the right ways to say, hey, I don't understand this. Can you talk to me about it? Or, hey, how do you see this issue? Because a lot of things talking about the environment can be very touchy, and not just like, I don't believe in climate change, but more like, oh, well, I don't want to change my life. And what do you mean I need to do things differently? And so those are tough conversations, and you have to have an audience, like a relationship with your audience, to have those conversations and be heard.
Yeah. A lot about science communication and any communication all comes down to trust. Yes. It's hard for sure. And yeah, it's a challenge, but important too. The next question is from Yoshi. So why do these prairies need fire? Like, what is it about them that makes fire like part of their life cycle?
So I talked about it a little bit, but what happens is that prairie plants have very, very deep roots. And so prairie fires are relatively low temperature, and they just sort of cut off the top. Oh. And when your weeds have very short roots, when they get burned, they like freak out and die. It's great. But the prairie plants, they survive. And so what you end up doing is sort of doing a fire weed whacking that helps. And included in those weeds are these like shrubby trees who really want to just take over space and then take over sunlight. And so when they take over sunlight, they actually choke out the other prairie plants. So a lot of prairie management is all about dealing with these shrubs and little trees, and fire helps.
Very cool. One of our students asked, do you ever put your art in a museum?
If they'll take me. Trained as a professional artist, like coming up as an undergrad, I was taught like the gallery is where you want to be. And I've found that that's not necessarily the most accessible way. Like only people looking to like see art go to galleries. Whereas, I've had the opportunity to do some signage work out in landscapes, or speaking in terms of Twitter and Instagram, I get to reach a lot more people than if it's just in one space. But if science education museums want my work, I'm happy to chat. Yeah, I know that I've had some art hanging in the offices of the Field Museum, but not hanging in the Field Museum.
Again, half cred. So I paint squid a lot, but I'm like not a professional, and I don't think that I'm very good, but it's just something I do for fun, and I don't like worry. Okay, I know, I can't help it. Your work is so beautiful. It's hard to. Okay. Well, anyway, I went to this like little hippie food co-op where I went to grad school in Connecticut, and it was a small town. And anybody who was a member of the food co-op could have their art up if they just put their name in. And I was like, I can do that, like, because no one's going to tell me no, because any member can just sign up. So I signed up, and my squid paintings were all over the wall and had little like information about each squid. And every time I went food shopping there, I would be like, that's my squid. It felt really, really, really good. And like,
that's so cool.
It felt really good. And having like, being in places where people are just gonna be is like where I want more science art to be. Like I want stickers at the bus stop. I want like, in subways, like I want in coffee shops. Like I want to see art that communicates science in places that people don't have to like go to the science museum to do. And yeah, all about it. That's amazing. Okay. Okay, so Miles wants to know, will there be any drawing today? So if people have things that they want to see drawn, I know that we have that capability today.
We have that capability.
We have that capability. Let's see. So in the meantime, I'm gonna ask another question. Oh wait, we already answered that one. Oh, one person asked, what's Liz's medium? And that's a perfect question for right now because you're about to show us.
All right. So I might do this. So these are acrylic inks.
Cool.
And I have a whole like little fleet of these Nalgene containers of inks that I have mixed from different bottles of acrylic ink. And let's see, what do I need to do? I'm drawing a plantain today. So
everyone at home, there are a couple people asking if they can draw along with you, and absolutely,
please.
Like, let's do it.
So okay, I'm gonna say this, but you don't have to. This is the type of paintbrush that famously Bill Watterson, who did Calvin and Hobbes, this is the type of paintbrushes he used to ink. Let's see. You see that? So it's a Winsor Newton #2. You don't need expensive tools to do this. I love this brush. And so you can kind of see that I've done some simple pencil drawing down here, and I use an erasable mechanical pencil. Thank God for Japan. They make amazing colored inks or colored lead. So this is actually a green colored lead.
Cool.
They're really good. The brand.
I'm gonna write this down.
Brand, if you want it. So I use that to sketch so that it kind of blends in, but also it's erasable. And so I've got green ink that I just splashed everywhere. Good job, me. And I do my inking just like that. So this, even push this closer. Sorry, got too many things in my face, as you can see. That's why I set this up for you guys. Here we go. So here we got a plantain. So these nice brushes allow you to go from a very thin line to a very thick line.
Ooh.
And so I'm doing a lot of dipping in my ink.
Pardon my cat.
Please, I love the cat. I am amazed that my cat is being so well behaved.
One person asked you, have you ever drawn your cat?
Have I ever drawn Pi? Only in like little sketches. I do pet portraits for friends for Christmas.
Oh, nice.
Because that's what art skills are meant for, is good Christmas presents. But so this particular drawing is for a research project on invasive species that enter prairie restorations. And this is a Plantago lanceota, or it's a lance-leaved plantain. And that cat is a good cat.
He's got a lot to say all the time.
I relate. So yeah, I mean, this is a lot of the work that I do.
One person asked, what is the most common plant in the prairie?
Oh, diversity is what makes a prairie great. But the classic tall grass is big blue stem, which sort of looks like, let's see, can you see me? Big blue stem is also known as turkey foot because it's got these like, the top of it are these 3 chunky turkey foot looking things. And then it's sort of long, branchy, grassy things.
All right,
But my
another
personal
question.
favorite is goldenrod, which is
Oh,
this.
nice. Oh, that's a cool tattoo. The next question is from Allison. What is the, and I don't necessarily expect you to know the answer to this, but we'll try anyway. What is the closest prairie to New York City? I came a bit late. So what exactly makes a prairie a prairie?
So prairie from the French technically means meadow, which is like something, a space for haying. But close to New York City, actually, the New Jersey Barrens are really amazing. They are what is technically called a savanna, which is partially like grass and forbs and partially trees, generally less than 50% coverage. And the New Jersey Pine Barrens are supposed to be awesome, and they are on my to-do list.
If you
So
ever come out, please let me know, because I go to the Pine Barrens in the summer like 2 to 3 times a week just
are they
to
awesome?
sniff the
Tell
pine
me.
and like I will light sheet for moths and just like
Nice.
so if anyone at home doesn't know what light sheeting is, basically you take like any old sheet in your house that's generally white is good because the light goes through it real nice, and you put like a big bright flashlight. If you have a UV flashlight, that's like it'll look kind of purpley. That bugs love it, so they'll really come to that. And there are some like really really bright lights that you can use that are this like special science kind that you can technically get at Home Depot, but you have to do a little DIY, like do it yourself at home, electrical engineering to get them to work. But anyway, you just put them out at night. I usually wait until about midnight because that's when the really big moths come out. When the sun sets, generally I get smaller moths, and then the big boys come out, or gals for that matter, come out later. And so I just sit in the forest, and I don't know if the Pine Barrens are technically a forest or not. Anyway, and I just wait to see what shows up, and then I take pictures of them, and it's fun. It's a good, wholesome activity for summertime.
Yeah, so the Pine Barrens are just one example, like Prairie, of a landscape that was managed with fire for a long time to prevent it from becoming just like completely overgrown by shrubby stuff. And similar, but further south, you have the Longleaf pine savanna, which is sort of basically like the United States looks like this. Let's see, can we see it? Yeah, okay. So we got Texas down here, and then Louisiana, and then Florida, right? Something like that, right? So the tall grass prairie, we'll draw the lakes here. This is fun. The tall grass prairie is sort of over here, and then the Pine Barrens and sort of like Savannah oak area is sort of over there. But longleaf pine savanna is like here. So all the way along the southern area. And a part of this is just like landscapes that got so overgrown, we didn't realize they were there until now science have gone back and surveyed and been like, oh, wow, if we burn this, it's got this huge diversity of all these different flowers and plants and animals. It's cool.
Awesome.
A lot of prairie people I know also study the longleaf pine down here.
Awesome. So some people want to know if you ever want, so is growing food your current only book that you've published?
Yes.
And that do you want to publish a book on prairies?
Yes.
Yes.
I'm working on my dissertation. It'll happen when it happens.
Yeah.
But yeah, that is what's coming next. The food book was just a wonderful coincidence of the right person knowing the right people and being like, oh, you want someone who does comics, who studies plants and is just getting started in comics. And I'm like, oh, you mean Liz?
Yeah. Yeah. That's one thing that Twitter is good for.
Yes.
It is sometimes wildly unpleasant, but
yeah,
sometimes really useful. So one person wants to know, just like, do you have like a one plant that live in the prairies that you'd like to tell us a little bit more about?
One plant. All of them. They're all really great. Let me think. I am looking at my arms because they're all different prairie plants. I don't know. So goldenrods get a bad rap because people think they give them allergies. They don't. So goldenrods bloom at the same time as ragweeds, which are technically also plants that are native to the prairie, but they are the ones that make you sneeze horribly. But because goldenrods are so showy and happen at exactly the same time for a long time, and still, like, people see my goldenrod tattoos and like, achoo, achoo, ha ha ha. It's like, no, that's not true. But there's huge diversity of goldenrods, and they're very pretty, and I love them very much. Yeah, that's my favorite plant.
Very cool. So we generally try to keep these sessions to 45 minutes, and we're at 47 minutes because I've been having too much fun. But so we always ask everybody the same 2 questions at the end of every session. And the first question is, if you had the attention of everybody in the world and you could tell them one thing about either prairies or art or science, like basically your area of expertise, what would you tell them?
I would tell them that, I can look at the camera for this. Hi. I would tell them that nature is not something outside of people. Nature is a part of people, and our landscapes have always involved people. So get involved in your local landscape. Wherever you are, doesn't have to be a prairie. There is some place that needs people to come take care of it, because our landscapes have been through a lot. And you can make a difference and join a long, long, long history of people helping out in their environment.
Awesome. And the second question that we have is, you still have everybody's attention in the world, and you can tell them one thing about literally anything. It can be as important, big picture as you'd like, or as silly and insignificant and just important to you. It can be anything. What do you tell them?
What a question. That's a hard one. If you are living in the United States or Canada, you are living on occupied land. And this is land that was illegally taken from the native peoples of the United States, or of the land that we now call the United States, formerly called Turtle Island. And it is to all of our benefit, both as humans, as landscapes, as animals, that we take every step we can to reconnect these people with their landscapes and fix some of the wrongs that we're still living with.
Yeah, a lot of wrongs in our continent. Big time. That's a great answer. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah. Okay, great. So do you have anything that you'd like to plug? Anything else you'd like to say before we wrap up?
Follow me on Twitter or Instagram if you want to see the work that I do. Otherwise, yeah, have a great day and go outside. Yeah. Even if it's horrible out, go for a walk.
Yes, go for a walk. That's amazing. Thank you so much. Erin, thank you for signing. As always, it's nice to see you again. What else? Thank you all for coming today. We have these sessions about once a week. Next week on the 13th at 1 p.m. Eastern again, we're going to be talking about zookeeping with Alexi Grausis. Alexi is a passionate, funny, amazing zookeeper in New Orleans. And so definitely join for that session. We're going to talk all about what it's like to work at a zoo, how to get there, what you actually do, and any questions that you have. So we hope to see you there. You can find more information about the Skype a Scientist program. We're a nonprofit organization. You can support our work at patreon.com/Skype a Scientist. Any support you can give us is really helpful. We completely rely on small donations to exist. And so if you want to learn more about the live streams that we have, you can check those out at skypeascientist.com/events. Other than that, I think that's it. Oh, and we always have, after these sessions, like if you can't make one later on, they're always posted to youtube.com/Skypeascientist. Yeah, thank you again. This has been so fun and delightful, and I loved every second of it. So we'll catch you next time. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks for having me. Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.